Every evening, as the city lights flickered on and wealthy men and women filled the high-end restaurants with laughter and fine wine, a small boy stood quietly at the corner of the street, his eyes not on the glittering cars or the fancy suits, but on the plates of food that passed him by, untouched and wasted. His clothes were torn, his shoes had holes, and yet there was something strange about him. He never asked for money, never stretched his hand out for coins, only one simple request: food. People walked past him with disdain, some mocking, some pitying, but one man, Mr. Thompson, a millionaire with everything money could buy, found himself strangely unsettled by the boy's persistence. Why did he always refuse to eat, even when someone finally gave him food? Why did he rush off into the shadows, clutching the meal to his chest as though it was treasure? Rumors spread. Some said he was a scammer, others claimed he was just lazy. But one night, when curiosity overpowered judgment, Mr. Thompson decided to follow the boy, unaware that what he was about to discover would shatter every assumption he had ever made about hunger, poverty, and the true meaning of sacrifice. Mr. Thompson was a man who lived in a world far removed from struggle. His life cushioned by wealth, polished by success, and shielded from the harsh realities most people faced. He owned tall glass buildings that pierced the skyline, restaurants where the elite dined, and cars that shone like mirrors under the sun. And yet, for all his riches, his heart often felt empty, though he never admitted it aloud. Every evening, when his driver pulled up to his favorite restaurant on Elm Street, Thompson would notice the same figure: a small boy, barely 12, dark-skinned, thin as a shadow, with eyes that carried both hunger and dignity. The boy never asked for money, never whined or begged like others might. He simply looked at people with quiet determination and asked softly if they could spare food. At first, Thompson dismissed him as another unfortunate child among thousands. But night after night, the boy appeared in the same spot, waiting silently, never missing a day, as if bound by some invisible duty. The sight stirred something inside Thompson, though he couldn't name it: curiosity, guilt, or perhaps an echo of compassion he thought long buried. What puzzled him most was that each time someone handed the boy food, he would not eat a single bite. Instead, he clutched it tightly and ran into the darkness, as if afraid it might be snatched away. Thompson began to wonder, why? Why would a boy so visibly starved never take even a morsel for himself? Was there someone waiting for him? Was there a secret he carried? The questions gnawed at Thompson's mind, pulling him into a web of mystery that his logical, business-driven brain couldn't shake off. And so, beneath the glow of street lamps and the hum of expensive cars, the seeds of an unlikely story began to grow, a story that would test not only what Thompson thought he knew about the world, but also the man he believed himself to be. The night that changed everything began like any other. Mr. Thompson had just finished a business dinner, his table covered with half-eaten dishes that would soon be scraped into the trash, when he spotted the boy again, standing near the restaurant's doorway, his small frame shivering under the cool night breeze. His gaze fixed not on money or jewelry, but on the plates of food being carried out. Something inside Thompson finally snapped. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Quietly instructing his driver to wait, he slipped into the shadows and followed at a distance as the boy received a small packet of leftovers from a sympathetic waitress. Instead of tearing into it, the boy clutched it against his chest like gold and hurried down the street, his steps fast, his eyes scanning nervously, as though the world might steal it away. Thompson's polished shoes echoed on the pavement as he trailed him through winding alleys where neon lights faded into darkness, past crumbling apartment blocks and broken street lamps that revealed a part of the city he had never dared to walk in. The boy finally disappeared into a rusted door of a decaying building, and with hesitant curiosity, Thompson edged closer, peeking through a cracked window, and what he saw froze him in place. Inside, a little girl lay curled up on a thin mattress, her face pale, her arms frail, coughing weakly, her lips dry from hunger. The boy knelt beside her, gently opening the food packet, whispering to her, as though offering hope with every word, breaking the bread into smaller pieces so she could eat first while he quietly pushed away his own hunger. Thompson felt his chest tighten. How many nights had this boy starved himself, just so his sister could survive? How many times had he stood outside in the cold, braving humiliation, just to bring her a single meal? The millionaire, who had dined on banquets without thought, suddenly felt a shame so heavy it bent his soul. This wasn't laziness, this wasn't begging for greed, this was sacrifice. Raw and unflinching, in a world that had turned its back onto innocent children. And for the first time in years, Mr. Thompson realized that his wealth, his cars, his towers of glass and steel, meant nothing compared to the simple act of love unfolding before his eyes. Mr. Thompson's chest heaved as he stood outside that cracked window. The cold night air pressing against his skin, yet failing to numb the fire of guilt burning within him. He had followed out of curiosity, perhaps even a sense of superiority. But what he had witnessed through that glass pane had shattered every assumption he ever carried. And in that moment, he knew he could no longer remain a silent observer. Pushing the rusty door open, its hinges groaning like a cry from the past, he stepped inside, and immediately the boy spun around, his frail body stiffening, his arms instinctively spreading wide to shield his sister as if his thin frame could form a wall strong enough to repel a giant. "Don't take it, please, this food is for her," the boy cried, his voice trembling yet burning with an intensity that pierced Thompson's soul. A voice that held no fear of hunger or pain, only fear of losing the last hope he carried for the little girl behind him. Thompson froze at the threshold, struck by the boy's courage. Here was a child with nothing, no shoes, no coat, no coin to his name. Yet he stood with the dignity of a warrior, defending his sister with everything he had left. For a long heartbeat, the millionaire could not speak, his throat thick with emotions he hadn't felt in decades. Then, as the girl coughed again, her frail body racked by weakness, Thompson fell to his knees on the filthy floor, his tailored suit brushing against broken tiles and puddles of stagnant water, his polished shoes soaking in dirt as though the earth itself demanded he abandon his pride. "I didn't come to take anything," he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking under the weight of shame. "I came because I needed to see with my own eyes." He reached into his jacket, not for the wallet that had once been his answer to every problem, but for the untouched sandwich he had carried absent-mindedly from his dinner, now trembling in his hands as he extended it toward them like a sacred offering. The boy stared at him with suspicion, his body taut, torn between mistrust and desperation. But when the girl's frail fingers brushed the bread, her lips parting in hunger, the boy's resistance faltered, his eyes flooding with tears he had fought so hard to hold back. As she took the first bite, a silence fell in the room so profound it roared in Thompson's ears, a silence that spoke of countless nights these children had suffered unseen, while men like him feasted and turned away. The millionaire's mind spun in torment memories of banquets where food had been discarded without thought, of deals struck in boardrooms while the world outside starved, of times he had looked at children like this one and dismissed them as lazy or unworthy. Crashing down upon him like a tidal wave of shame, his hands shook as he reached forward, resting gently on the boy's shoulder, feeling the sharp bones beneath the thin skin, and he whispered with a conviction that surprised even himself, "No child should live like this. Not while I still have breath." The boy's defenses wavered, his small chest heaving as though years of silent suffering were threatening to break free all at once. And in that charged, trembling moment, the wall between wealth and poverty, privilege and despair, collapsed completely. Mr. Thompson was no longer the untouchable man of glass towers and gleaming cars. He was a man stripped bare, humbled in the presence of a child who had shown him what love, sacrifice, and resilience truly meant. And as tears carved unashamed paths down his face, he realized this was not charity, not pity, but redemption, a chance to finally use the fortune he had hoarded to give back what the world had cruelly denied to those who deserved it most. That night was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a transformation. For when Mr. Thompson left that crumbling apartment, his polished shoes coated in dust and his soul trembling from the weight of what he had seen, he carried with him not only the image of two children surviving on love and sacrifice, but also a vow that he could no longer live his life the same way. The very next morning, he returned, not as the untouchable millionaire who swept past the poor with a glance, but as a man humbled, carrying bags of food, medicine, and warm clothes, his voice unsteady as he promised Daniel and Sarah that their nights of hunger and fear were over. What began as an act of conscience quickly became a mission. He arranged doctors for Sarah, sat beside her bed as treatment slowly restored color to her cheeks, and enrolled Daniel in school, placing books in his hands and hope in his heart. Each day he spent with them chipped away at the cold armor he had built around himself over years of wealth and power, and the emptiness that no amount of luxury had ever filled began to dissolve, replaced by the quiet joy of purpose. Daniel, who once stood silently in the shadows begging for food, now walked through classroom doors with dignity, his back straighter, his eyes brighter, his future no longer chained to hunger. Sarah, who had once coughed herself to sleep on a broken mattress, now laughed as she regained her strength, her voice carrying through the apartment like sunlight breaking after endless storm clouds. But the change did not remain within those four walls, it spread outward like ripples in water. Thompson's employees noticed the shift in their employer. The city took note of the millionaire who suddenly funded soup kitchens, opened shelters for abandoned children, and created scholarships for those who, like Daniel, carried brilliance but not privilege. The man who had once been praised only for his business acumen became admired for his humanity. Though when asked what caused such a change, Thompson never told the story to glorify himself. Instead, he told it as a confession, admitting that his greatest lesson in life had not come from wealth or success, but from a boy who starved silently for the sake of his sister. He would say, with a humility that silenced even the most skeptical listener, "I thought I knew what it meant to be rich until a hungry child showed me that true wealth is not counted in money, but in the lives we lift up." And so the years passed. Daniel and Sarah growing under Thompson's care, not as charity cases, but as family, sharing meals, holidays, and milestones with the man who had once been a stranger peering through their cracked window. Daniel studied hard, driven by the memory of his past struggles and the promise of his future, eventually becoming a man capable of helping others just as he had once been helped. While Sarah, her health restored, blossomed into a young woman full of kindness and ambition. Together, they carried forward the spirit of sacrifice and resilience that had defined their childhood, and in doing so, they became living proof of how one act of compassion could alter the course of not just one life, but many. Thompson himself, now older, often reflected that his wealth had finally found a purpose beyond vanity, that the towers he built were not monuments to his name but tools for change. And he left behind a legacy not of cold numbers or forgotten deals, but of warmed hearts and saved lives. And when the story of his life was eventually told, people remembered not the millionaire who once dined in luxury while a boy starved outside his doors, but the man who chose to follow that boy one night and, in doing so, discovered that the richest treasure any of us can ever possess is the ability to give when others have nothing. The years rolled forward like waves against the shore, eroding but also reshaping the lives that once seemed destined for despair. Yet the story of Daniel and Sarah was not an isolated miracle, it was a fragile thread woven into a tapestry of countless others who never find their rescuer. A reminder that while one act of compassion can transform a life, the broader structure of society continues to suffocate so many who look like them. For every Daniel whose hunger is noticed, countless black children still wander invisible through streets, where their skin is seen as a warning rather than a cry for help, where their requests for food are met with suspicion instead of empathy, where their very existence is too often judged as a burden rather than embraced as a blessing. And even as Sarah's laughter grew stronger under the healing touch of nourishment and safety, statistics in the world outside whispered of systemic injustices. Classrooms where black students are punished more harshly than their white peers, neighborhoods where opportunity is stripped away by redlining and generational neglect, hospitals where black mothers are more likely to die giving birth simply because of the color of their skin, and prisons where young men who look like Daniel are locked away for minor offenses while others walk free. The cruelty of poverty is not neutral, it is sharpened by the blade of racism, passed down through policies, assumptions, and silent acceptance. And though one millionaire's awakening gave Daniel and Sarah a future, the truth remains that compassion should never depend on luck or charity, but on justice embedded in the fabric of our world. Because how many Daniels are still out there, clutching scraps of bread for a sister who cannot rise from a mattress, unseen by those who drive past in comfort, dismissed as lazy or criminal while their hearts beat only with love and sacrifice? How many Sarahs still waste away quietly in hidden rooms, their hunger masked by walls that no one cares to enter? How many children grow up carrying burdens they never chose, punished twice over, first by poverty, then by the prejudice that tells them their pain is deserved? And if one wealthy man could change when forced to witness the truth with his own eyes, what excuse do the rest of us have when the evidence is everywhere? When the headlines cry out daily about the inequalities we allow to fester, when the stories of injustice are not rare but relentless, written in the lives of our neighbors, our classmates, our co-workers, even if we choose not to see them. History itself has been crying out for centuries. From the chains of slavery to the shadows of Jim Crow, from segregated lunch counters to the school-to-prison pipeline, from lynching trees to modern-day shootings of unarmed black men and women whose names become hashtags instead of futures. Yet, despite the progress celebrated in speeches and textbooks, the reality is that the struggle persists in quieter but equally devastating forms. And the most dangerous injustice is not always the one that shocks us on the evening news, but the one we normalize in silence. The one that tells us a hungry child asking for food is someone else's problem. The one that whispers that suffering in black communities is inevitable. The one that makes it easier to cross the street, avert our eyes, and keep walking. But if a single moment of awareness could change the trajectory of a millionaire who once believed poverty was a choice, what transformations could unfold if entire societies opened their eyes? Not once in a fleeting act of charity, but daily in deliberate choices of fairness, empathy, and action. What revolutions of dignity could be born if every person chose to see Daniels not as beggars, but as brothers, Sarahs not as burdens, but as daughters, and hunger not as a mark of failure, but as an indictment of our collective priorities? And so this story is more than the tale of one boy's sacrifice and one man's redemption. It is a mirror, held up to every viewer, every listener, every human being who has ever turned away from discomfort and called it peace. Because the measure of our humanity is not found in our wealth, or our comfort, or our achievements, but in the way we respond to the silent cries around us, in the way we choose to see or not to see, to act or to excuse, to love or to dismiss. The question is no longer whether injustice exists around us, it breathes among us. It has been built into the very structures we walk on. The real question is whether you, sitting here, hearing this story, will continue to let Daniels and Sarahs fade into the background of your daily life, or whether you will choose, in whatever small or great way you can, to step into the shadows and bring light where the world has hidden it. Will you continue to cross the street, to shrug and say, "Not my problem," to believe the myths that shield privilege from responsibility? Or will you, like the man who once walked past a boy but then chose to follow, allow yourself to be changed, to see, to act, to fight for the justice that every child deserves, regardless of the color of their skin? Because change does not begin with governments or millionaires. It does not wait for laws or speeches. It begins with us, with you, with the decision you make the very next time you are confronted with another person